News at 10 with Trevor Mcdonald.
The battle to save the crippled Mir Space Station. American serial killer may have struck again. Russell murders, a man is questioned by police. And an emotional homecoming ends a round-the-world odyssey. Good evening. The crew of the Russian space station Mir have been battling to overcome another terrifying crisis today. One of them accidentally disconnected a computer cable, plunging the craft into darkness and sending it cartwheeling through space. The crew, including the Briton Michael Foale, took to their escape capsule and used its power to get the space station back on even keel. It was already badly damaged from the collision with a cargo carrier 3 weeks ago. Our Moscow correspondent Julian Mannion reports from Russian Mission Control.
The crew of Mir have been firing the engines on their escape module as they battle to stabilize the space station after its latest accident. At Mission Control near Moscow, visibly tense officials have denied reports that the escape module is running short of fuel, and the crew may have to abandon the station if the problems are not solved by tomorrow morning. The latest crisis on Mir began when a mistake by one of the crew switched off the system which keeps Mir in the right position. The battered space station started tumbling chaotically. The result was that Mir's remaining solar panels stopped generating electricity and virtually all power was lost.
The situation is very unpleasant. It is similar to the one we faced after the collision with the cargo ship.
Russian officials are declining to say publicly which of the crew members made the mistake of pulling out the wrong computer cable. But Russian television is reporting that it was the crew captain, Vasily Tsibliev. He was at the controls during the collision with a cargo ship 3 weeks ago, and he's since complained of heart irregularities, probably brought on by stress. Russian experts now have real fears about the pressure the crew is under.
Altogether, it creates awful tension, extreme tension.
The crew are now trying to get some rest. They have apparently managed to stabilize Mir, and they're hoping to recharge its batteries tomorrow. But space officials say that the planned operation to repair some of the collision damage will again have to be postponed. Russian space officials insist that this latest crisis can and will be overcome. But one question is how much more of this the crew of Mir can take. Today's loss of power was caused by human error, and that seems to suggest that the strain and fatigue of the last 3 weeks are really taking their toll. Julian Mannion, News at 10, and Mission Control near Moscow.
Concerned about the Russian commander's health, now looks certain to cast Michael Foale into a leading role on Mir. But could today's accident prove to be the last straw for the entire project and lead to its abandonment? Here's our science editor, Lawrence McGuinty.
The more doubts that arise about Vasily Tsibliev, the more Michael Foale is pushed into the foreground. Today, NASA confirmed they'd given the go-ahead for him to train for the spacewalk next week.
The final decision on the EVA for all crew members will be made at a joint readiness review that we will conduct together with the Russians by video about 2 days before the EVA would be executed.
With pressure mounting on the crew of Mir, restricted to the main module, it's hardly surprising they made the elementary mistake of pulling out the wrong cable. Inevitably, that closed down the gyrodynes, which hold Mir's position, and it started to tumble. It's happened before. It's a sign the station is getting old. Once more, the crew were forced into the Soyuz escape craft to use its thrusters to regain control, as they did 3 weeks ago after the collision. ITN space consultant Jeff Perry has been monitoring Mir's radio messages. He says they've now regained control, but further mishaps could be disastrous.
If they have another problem, and which they deem it necessary to bring the crew back and leave Mir unattended, it could mean the end of the Mir Space Station.
That's an opinion echoed by a distinguished American ex-astronaut, Jim Lovell, from Apollo 13.
The Mir itself, I think, has done its duty with regards to the Americans and the docking and the long-term space flights. I think it's served a very good service to the Russians, too. And now I think we should concentrate on the International Space Station.
But there are signs international faith in Mir is ebbing. A French cosmonaut is in training to go to Mir next month. ITN learned today the French wanted to withdraw after the accident 3 weeks ago, but were persuaded not to. Lawrence McGuinty, News at 10.
FBI agents hunting the killer of Gianni Versace were diverted to a second murder in Miami today. A wealthy doctor was found shot in bed. Neighbors said he was homosexual, and a man seen running away more or less fitted the description of Andrew Cunanan, the prime suspect in the Versace case. Tom Bradby in America has the latest.
Tonight, it looks as if Andrew Cunanan may have claimed his 6th victim. 2 days after Gianni Versace's murder, police were called to this house in suburban Miami after a burglar alarm went off. They found a man thought to be a gay doctor lying on his bed. He'd been shot. A man matching Cunanan's general description was seen running away.
One of the neighbors saw a white male, about 5'10", slim-built, wearing a dark jacket, well-dressed, with dark hair, fleeing southbound on Miami Springs Avenue.
The police and FBI have been desperately combing South Florida for Cunanan. The Attorney General made an urgent plea for help.
If you have any information relating to Cunanan, please call your local FBI office.
There were other developments today. This picture from a security camera allegedly shows Cunanan running away from Mr. Versace's mansion. And a car park attendant confirmed that this truck, stolen from Cunanan's last victim, had been parked next to Mr. Versace's mansion for 5 weeks. As Mr. Versace himself was cremated, watched only by his family, his friends continued to mourn him.
Yeah, he was one of my closest, dearest friends, yeah. It's happened to me twice now with John Lennon, and now it's happened to me with Gianni, and it's just, you know, it's such a shock.
The FBI's net does appear to be tightening around Mr. Cunanan, and they hope the publicity will help, but he may yet prove elusive. He's been on their most wanted list for 2 months already, and most men are on the list for an average of 4 years before they're caught. Tom Bradby, News at 10, at FBI headquarters in the United States.
Kent police are questioning a man about the murders of Lynn and Megan Russell, the mother and daughter battered to death with a hammer last summer. He's in his 30s, and police said his arrest followed their new appeal for information last week. Adrian Britton reports.
For over 13 hours, the man has been held at Chatham Police Station, but detectives are releasing only brief details about their latest suspect. He is in his 30s and comes from the Medway area of Kent. His name has not featured in the inquiry so far. He was arrested at breakfast time after a tip-off from someone responding to appeals in the media. It is exactly 1 year and 1 week since Lynn Russell and her 6-year-old daughter Megan were beaten to death with a hammer. Mrs. Russell and her 2 daughters had been walking home from school along this secluded bridleway when they were attacked by a man in a red car who tried to rob them. 9-year-old Josie, now 10, barely survived the attack. Yet slowly, through gentle coaxing, she has begun to recall the events of that summer's afternoon, small but crucial recollections from a young girl who is the central witness in this exhaustive inquiry. It is just possible she will eventually be able to identify who murdered her mother and sister. Police are indicating that the questioning of this man could go into the weekend. That is, if they get permission from magistrates to detain him. But detectives say, despite the arrest, their investigation continues. They point out that last December, another man was arrested. He was also in his 30s, and he was released without charge after 36 hours of questioning. Adrian Britton, News at 10, at Chatham Police Station in Kent.
2 of the biggest mortgage lenders announced increases in their interest rates today. The Halifax's rate for borrowers is going up to 8.2% from the 1st of August. It's the 3rd increase since the election. The Nationwide, which is still a mutual society, increased its rate to 7.85%. The Prince of Wales is throwing a big birthday party for Camilla Parker Bowles at Highgrove tomorrow, and it's fueled speculation that they could be planning to get married. The public seemed to be coming round to the idea, though the Prince's local vicar was still hostile to it today. Here's our royal correspondent Nicholas Owen.
Prince Charles's Gloucestershire home. In its grounds are lavish parties being prepared, complete with huge marquees, to help celebrate the 50th birthday today of Camilla Parker Bowles, who's now at the centre of the royal question of the year. Will she and Charles eventually marry? They shouldn't, says the local vicar, not if Charles is to be head of the Church of England.
I cannot see that he can assume or succeed to the title of Defender of the Faith of a church whose teaching he ignores and in this instance rejects.
This secluded house in Wiltshire belongs to Camilla Parker Bowles, and it's not very far from Highgrove, Prince Charles's country retreat. Until recently, public opinion seemed to be very much against any idea of them marrying. Now we have discovered that opinion may be shifting significantly. In nearby Chippenham, any remarriage is mostly welcomed, but not what could also be involved.
It's their life. They can do what they like.
Would you be happy one day for Camilla to be Queen?
No, I wouldn't.
Do you think Camilla should be Queen one day?
No, I think that's going too far. My husband and I, we disagree on a lot of this, and I just don't think he treated Diana right.
So he shouldn't marry Camilla?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so.
What do you think about it?
I think he should.
But the expert view, if Charles marries Camilla, once he's king, she would be queen. She couldn't remain a private individual.
I think that causes more problems than it solves. It's quite foreign to the British tradition of law, and I think we should forget about it. It's a red herring.
So the road ahead for Camilla looks complex. She herself has always preferred a countrywoman's life, shunning personal publicity. Perhaps that very reticence has helped swing opinion towards accepting her at Charles's side.
The British public is a very forgiving public, and I think they're ready to see some new dramatic turn in the Prince of Wales's fortunes. I think they would be behind him, and I think that the sooner they address the marriage issue, the better.
Camilla spent her birthday at her Wiltshire home. This evening she was spotted leaving, driven by one of Prince Charles's bodyguards. Nicholas Owen, News at 10.
Coming up next on News at 10 tonight, Harman announces the great pension shake-up. Will you pay more? Freed from prison tonight after a murder conviction is quashed. Around the world and back, the disabled yachtsman home to a hero's welcome. And Tiger's message to his fans after Royal Troon takes its toll on his game.
I've never quit in a tournament, so I've never been accused of that.
Welcome back. The government launched its review of pensions today. It's looking for a system acceptable all round and affordable in the long term. The basic state pension will survive, but the young workers of today will probably be required to pay for second private pensions. Here's our business editor, Mark Webster.
Pressures on the pensions industry tonight to come up with cheap and easy-to-understand schemes. This week it faced criticism that the cost of private pensions was too high and the public got a raw deal.
We're going to tackle the poverty of the poorest pensioners in Britain, but we're also looking at people who are in work today to ensure that they too, in their turn, don't retire onto means-tested benefits.
12 million people in this country are facing retirement with only the basic state pension. While the government said that will be guaranteed, it wants as many younger people as possible to take out a second or stakeholder pension. To maintain your current standard of living, financial experts say you'd have to retire on 2/3 of salary. For a man aged 30 earning £20,000 a year, that's a pension of £13,000 at today's prices. To retire at 60, he'd need to save more than £500,000. That'd cost £440 a month, rising by inflation every year. For a woman in the same situation, it would cost even more, because they're expected to live longer. She'd have to start paying £528 a month. The opposition's unimpressed.
I think they're trying to distract attention away from the huge tax they're imposing on pension funds in the budget by pretending that they're interested in doing the exact opposite.
And that criticism has been echoed by some in the pensions industry, who say the government is now simply trying to redress the balance, after the Chancellor in his last budget changed the tax status of the industry, costing an extra £5 billion a year. However, all sides are now agreed that provided there is widespread discussion, they'll come up with a more rational format for pensions into the next millennium. Mark Webster, News at 10, The City.
A teenager who was jailed for life for the murder of a policeman, although he was 100 yards away at the time and in handcuffs, was freed tonight by the law lords. Philip English had been found guilty along with an older man who actually stabbed the sergeant to death. Our Home Affairs editor Jennifer Nadel reports.
Driven to freedom this evening by his family, Philip English has been behind bars since he was 15. Tonight, his overwhelming emotion was gratitude.
Thank you for believing, never giving up. Thank you. That's all I can say.
Sergeant Bill Forth was stabbed in 1993. Philip English was 100 yards away and under arrest after a fight with the police. But the law of joint enterprise held him jointly responsible for the killing. Paul Weddell, who carried out the stabbing, remains in jail. At the House of Lords today, Sergeant Forth's widow gave her reaction.
I just feel that Bill has been completely let down by the British justice system. Obviously, I don't know why, and I need to understand why.
We have been very aware that a man was dead, but the person who was responsible for that is in jail. It's not as if they haven't got the culprit. Philip clearly had nothing to do with that.
English's solicitor says the law must now be reformed.
Philip English was convicted despite the fact that the crime was committed by someone else who was 100 yards away, and despite the fact that Philip had no idea that he was going to kill the policeman.
Today's decision will also raise the hopes of those campaigning to clear the name of Derek Bentley. Bentley was convicted and hanged for the murder of a policeman, which, as with Philip English, was carried out by a companion while he was under arrest. Jennifer Nadel, News at 10 at the House of Lords.
4 men and a woman were arrested tonight after a haul of 400 guns was seized by police in Brighton in Sussex. The guns, including automatics and handguns, were found at the home of a registered firearms dealer. Police also discovered what they described as a gun workshop. University students, many receiving degrees today, have reacted angrily to proposals about the imposition of tuition fees of up to £1,000 a year. The proposals by the government's education advisor, Sir Ron Deering, will be published next week. And the dates were announced today for the referendums on devolution. Scottish Secretary Donald Dewar set September 11th for the vote north of the border. And the Welsh Secretary, Ron Davies, announced September 18th for Wales. The government sanctioned a force of young Alco cops today to catch out shopkeepers who sell the new Alco Pop drinks to underage drinkers. They're also proposing to make it illegal for adults to buy them on behalf of youngsters. Our health correspondent Anya Sitharam reports.
Tonight, Alco Pops are as popular as ever, reprieve from a threatened ban by ministers. Instead, police are to confiscate alcohol from under-18s in public places, and teenage Alco cops will help catch rogue retailers. These snoops will be the children of trading standards officers.
If they get some kind of supplement to their pocket money from their parents, that's fine, but I don't think we're going to have an elaborate state funding scheme for it, no.
Alco Pops, with their sweet taste and bright packaging, are said to deliberately target youngsters. Children we spoke to today said a ban was unnecessary.
I don't think they should be banned, but I think they should have less sort of colourful packaging and stuff like that.
I think the shopkeepers have to tighten up in that and not serve children.
The drinks industry watchdog today said new products would be strictly vetted and retailers could lose their licences if they sell drinks that breach its code. Critics are sceptical that the tougher but voluntary code will help curb underage drinking. Ministers have given the industry a year to prove that their measures can prevent alcoholic drinks getting into the wrong hands. Anya Sitharam, News at 10.
Sport now, and the lead in the Open Golf Championship is being jointly held tonight by Jim Furyk of America and Ulsterman Darren Clark. They're both at 4 under. Some pre-tournament favourites found the going tough today. The brilliant Tiger Woods is 1 over and Colin Montgomery 5 over. From Royal Troon, Peter Staunton reports.
Tiger Woods.
With a vast crowd willing him on, Tiger Woods set out to try and continue his spectacular run of success. But for a while, the 21-year-old golf genius was almost blown away by a blustery Scottish wind. The first hole was negotiated in bizarre fashion from one bunker to another. He got away with that, but worse soon followed. A huge gallery packed with young fans who'd been admitted to the course for free, then watched as Woods first fell foul of the gorse bushes, which lie perilously close to the fairways, and then proceeded to take 7 shots at the par 4 11th hole. The round had a happy ending. 2 late birdies left him just 1 over par. He'd come through the first day as a professional at the Open, relatively unscathed.
I focus very hard and I play with my heart, and sometimes you can see my emotions. I wear them on my sleeves a little bit, but it's definitely, I've never quit in a tournament, so I've never been accused of that.
Nick Faldo was another who survived a difficult day. A birdie at the last, a perfect platform to challenge for the lead in the second round. But the man who knows this course best of all found that local knowledge was of little help. Colin Montgomery hit a 5 over par round. He needs a big improvement to survive the cut. Peter Staunton, News at 10, Royal Troon.
The main headlines again. The crew of the Russian space station Mir have been battling to overcome another terrifying crisis today. One of them accidentally disconnected a computer cable, sending Mir cartwheeling through space. And Kent police are questioning a man about the murders of Lynn and Megan Russell, the mother and daughter battered to death a year ago. And finally tonight, we salute the crew of Time and Tide, last home in the BT Global Challenge yacht race, but the first all-disabled crew ever to sail right round the world. Time and Tide skipper James Hatfield said, "We set out to change attitudes." ITN's Michael Nicholson saw them set out 10 months ago, followed them round the world and joined them again today as they crossed the finishing line. Here's his special report.
So who was it who said they'd never last the distance? Who are the doubting Thomases who reckoned this was the crew who'd never make it? Well, it's taken 10 months and 30,000 miles to prove them wrong. This morning, ending an historic voyage, they finally sighted England home and family. It all began last September with a gale in the Solent heralding what was billed as the world's toughest ever yacht race. First leg took them across the Atlantic to Brazil, and a slow and silent dawn arrival in Rio on October the 29th. Then south again, rounding Cape Horn, arriving in New Zealand on the second day of the new year. It was a spectacular arrival, but for some, the race was proving too tough, the discipline too rigid. They decided to go no further. But the stalwarts remained, skippered by James Hatfield, a veteran of 8 open heart operations. First mate Chris Ogg has a wasting disease. Nigel Smith on the foredeck and ex-paratrooper Paul Burns are both amputees. The blonde giant, Paul Hebblethwaite, is deaf, and their collective motto, racing the latitudes to change attitudes. The departure from Wellington marked the halfway. The 14 yachts sailed out of Cook Strait for the shortest leg across the Tasman Sea to Sydney, Australia, and a suitably chaotic champagne-drenched good day, or rather good evening. It had been a tough crossing, but the worst was still ahead. No regrets yet, Leslie?
No, not at all. I'll go on round the world. I'll get there. Get back to Southampton in July.
Leg 4 took them through the grueling Southern Ocean to Cape Town and back over the equator to Boston. With 27,000 miles on the clock, all they had to do now was turn east and head for home. And the final sprint across the Atlantic to Southampton and the finishing line. This the first disabled crew to circumnavigate the globe. They really have raced the latitudes to change the attitudes, and to each of them and to all the people like them who've followed their progress around the world. That is what this has all been about. James, take that from me, will you? And then champagne for the skipper, the man who, despite the odds, made it all come true.
Out there, when they discover they are frightened, fear is a disability, and for some it empowers them and others it paralyzes them. And maybe I've been too harsh on them at times. But you're not out there to win a popularity contest. You've got to get them through.
You've seen the T-shirts, haven't you?
No.
Have you not?
No.
Been there, done that, never going again.
There was a few moments I thought, oh, am I going to be able to make it? I've had a few problems with my legs and I've taken quite a lot of painkillers, but I'm here now.
Simply the best, the song belongs to them, they've made it their own, and why not? The 14 men and women who've so courageously fought the oceans in their own disabilities to show us that there is more than one way of winning. Michael Nicholson, News at 10, Southampton.
What a great welcome home. That's News at 10 tonight. We'll be back tomorrow. From all of us here at ITN, good night.
Hello, good evening. Some decent weather on the way for most of us this coming weekend. Northern and western parts of Britain will have a taste of it tomorrow. The southeast, though, a cool and breezy day tomorrow, until that better weather extends across the rest of Britain as we go in towards the weekend. As far as tonight's concerned, there are still some heavy showers around. Many of them will gradually die away. A cool night ahead with temperatures down into single figures for many of us. And then tomorrow morning, well, northern and eastern areas will have a rather grey start. But in the northeast, I think the light showers will gradually die away, and then much of Britain will be fine and dry through the rest of the day, except eastern counties of England there, where you'll have a fresh breeze off the sea and quite a number of showers around, a fair bit of cloud too. And temperatures tomorrow up to around the low 20s at best, 21 perhaps is 70, but of course feeling much colder than that if you're in the winds there on the east coast. Now what about the weekend? It does look better for the weekend. Most places dry with some sunshine. Those cold winds will ease down as we go through Saturday into Sunday, and temperatures looking better too through the weekend, into the low 20s for most of us, 24 perhaps at best, that's 75, but chilly in the east tomorrow. Good night.
Power gen, generating electricity whatever the weather.
On Sunday, the story of one tigress and
Lawrence McGinty.
The more doubts that arise about Vasily Sibliev, the more Michael Foale is pushed into the foreground. Today, NASA confirmed they've given the go-ahead for him to train for the spacewalk next week.
The final decision on the EVA for all crew members will be made at a joint readiness review that we will conduct together with the Russians by video about 2 days before the EVA would be executed.
With pressure mounting on the crew of Mir, restricted to the main module, it's hardly surprising they made the elementary mistake of pulling out the wrong cable. Inevitably, that closed down the gyrodynes, which hold Mir's position, and it started to tumble. It's happened before. It's a sign the station is getting old. Once more, the crew were forced into the Soyuz escape craft.
Through space. The crew, including the Briton Michael Foale, took to their escape capsule and used its power to get the space station back on even keel. It was already badly damaged from the collision with a cargo carrier 3 weeks ago. Our Moscow correspondent Julian Mannion reports from Russian Mission Control.
The crew of Mir have been firing the engines on their escape module as they battle to stabilize the space station after its latest accident. At Mission Control near Moscow, visibly tense officials have denied reports that the escape module is running short of fuel, and the crew may have to abandon the station if the problems are not solved by tomorrow morning. The latest crisis on Mir began when a mistake by one of the crew switched off the system which keeps Mir in the right position. The battered space station started tumbling chaotically. The result was that Mir's remaining solar panels stopped generating electricity and virtually all power was lost.
The situation is very unpleasant. It is similar to the one we faced after the collision with the cargo ship.
Russian officials are declining to say publicly which of the crew members made the mistake of pulling out the wrong computer cable, but Russian television is reporting that it was the crew captain Vasily Sibliev. He was at the controls during the collision with a cargo ship 3 weeks ago, and he's since complained of heart irregularities, probably brought on by stress. Russian experts now have real fears about the pressure the crew is under.
Altogether, it creates awful tension, extreme tension.
From ITN, News at 10 with Trevor Mcdonald.
The battle to save the crippled Mir Space Station. American serial killer may have struck again. Russell murders, a man is questioned by police. And an emotional homecoming ends a round-the-world odyssey. Good evening. The crew of the Russian space station Mir have been battling to overcome another terrifying crisis today. One of them accidentally disconnected a computer cable, plunging the craft into darkness and sending it cartwheel.
The crew are now trying to get some rest. They have apparently managed to stabilize Mir, and they're hoping to recharge its batteries tomorrow. But space officials say that the planned operation to repair some of the collision damage will again have to be postponed. Russian space officials insist that this latest crisis can and will be overcome. But one question is how much more of this the crew of Mir can take. Today's loss of power was caused by human error, and that seems to suggest that the strain and fatigue of the last 3 weeks are really taking their toll. Julian Mannion, News at 10, and mission control near Moscow.
Concerned about the Russian commander's health now looks certain to cast Michael Foale into a leading role on Mir. But could today's accident prove to be the last straw for the entire project and lead to its abandonment? Here's our science editor,